Good evening. Thanks very much for joining us on this special edition of What's Hot. Our top story tonight, and this is a newslaundry.com exclusive that we're bringing you here on CNBC TV 18. 5 lakh crore rupees, that staggering number, is the value of loan defaults the Indian banking system is facing. And no lawsuits have been filed to recover these loans. We are not saying this. This is as per the RBI's willful defaulters and defaulting borrowers list that online portal newslaundry.com has accessed and assessed. Newslaundry.com has been working on this data for the past month now. Now, just to clarify and put this in perspective, the RBI's willful defaulters and defaulting borrowers is part of the Reserve Bank's negative list. Now, this negative list is updated every quarter and circulated among banks across the country. This is not, and I repeat, not the affidavit on default submitted by the Reserve Bank to the Supreme Court. Now, here are some of the highlights that this list has thrown out. These are highlights that have been put together by online portal newslaundry.com. Both private and public sector companies are equally responsible for the situation. At 65,700 crore rupees, it's LIC and not State Bank of India which has the largest amount of loans in the default category. This as per the data accessed by newslaundry.com. Also, Usha Ispat is the largest corporate defaulter with outstanding loans amounting to over 16,900 crores. Also, data accessed and assessed by newslaundry.com. I'm now joined by the News Laundry journalists Garima Chitkara and Manisha Pandey, who've accessed that list, and they join us now from New Delhi. Also joining us is our resident banking expert, Lata. Appreciate you joining us. Manisha and Garima, let me start by asking you, how long has it taken for the two of you to access and assess this data and come to the conclusions that you've arrived at? Also, very importantly, have you reached out to all the companies that have been mentioned in your list? Have you elicited a response from any of them? Manisha, if you can start.
Hi, Shireen. So, just to give you an idea of how much, it took us 2 months to, we at News Laundry have been working on this for about 2 months. This list has entries, over 1 lakh entries. So this was an enormous task for us because we had to just fish out this data from this list. It has defaults over and above rupees 25 lakh. So we had to sift through a lot of this. We took into account defaults above rupees 500 crore and above. And we did reach out to every company that we have named in the top 10 list. We reached out to people in the RBI. We reached out to a lot of people in the banking sector too, and we didn't get any response. So which is why the task was all the more difficult for us, because we had this list. We were very sure of its authenticity, but we had to just make sense of so much data on our own. And there was.
I can imagine
there were a lot of peculiarities
that it was quite a task. Yeah, go ahead, Manisha. What were the peculiarities that you noticed?
There was strange, like we saw LIC on the list. Now, we didn't know what to make of it. And we wanted to reach out to somebody in RBI who tells us, why is LIC on this list. Garima would tell you that the asset classification, there is this entry which says NA. Now, what we were told is NA are write-offs, but they aren't write-offs. These are just, these are defaults that the banks think they'd never get. So they aren't write-offs because they're still on this list, but they call it NA, which is non-applicable, which is strange. So
the other entries on this list was doubtful and loss, which is a well-known NPA classification. Just coming back to the point on LIC, I mean, I think this really sort of highlights the fact that this whole process threw up more questions than answers for us, and that's why we're quite glad that we've been able to trigger a conversation on your channel, and we're actually happy to put a lot of these questions to your panelists and to people that experts in the banking field as well. So we want to know a lot of these questions that you have asked us are questions that we want to know ourselves.
And you're absolutely right. We're trying to elicit those answers as well. Manisha and Garima, I'll come back to you in just a second, but let me also bring in Lata into this conversation. Lata, some of these cases go back several years, and this is, of course, data that News Laundry has put together, but some of these names have been brought up in the past as well.
Yeah, actually, 3 or 4 names, for instance, Usha Ispat, Prakash Industries, these names, even Lloyd Steel. In 2003, I remember a list of names being discussed in the Indian Express when, at that time, the total bad loan mess was 1 lakh crore. And we thought that was a huge amount of money. Jaswant Singh, I remember, as the finance minister, had called it the bank loot and not the bad loan. The same names had been there. Now, what I'm curious to know is, at that time, Usha Ispat was perhaps, the loan amount was about 300, 400 crore. Lloyd Steel also was around less than 1,000 crore. And that was a great deal of money at that time. But now the numbers that the News Laundry team has put out is almost 17,000 crores for Usha Ispat. So if they were a bad loan in 2003, I don't know whether further loans were given or whether that loan has gotten accumulated and interest is accumulating on it. It's compounded and therefore it looks so big. So is this that these are such old loans that sheer compounding has made it look big, or fresh loans were given to a bad company?
Absolutely, and those are questions that we need answers to. But Garima and Manisha, coming back to you, if I were to look at the list, a large majority is from the metals, the mining sector, the steel sector. There's 2 government-owned companies in this list, Hindustan Cables and Hindustan Photo Films. In fact, as we speak today, it's a parliament question. The government has said that they've ordered the closure of Hindustan Cables, and the CCA has taken that decision on the 1st of March of this year. Was a large chunk of the defaulters that you've been able to ascertain on the back of the data that you've accessed and assessed, largely from the infrastructure sector, particularly from the steel sector?
Yes, a lot of the companies that are not even in the top 10 list that we are going to talk about have been in the steel sector, in the metals and mining sector, and a lot of them are actually PSU firms. So this was a pretty. I mean, it's an understandable phenomenon, because the steel sector has been under stress over the past few years. With the PSU sector, I think it's doubly problematic because the taxpayer can potentially lose money twice. Once through its investment in the failing company, and then for the loans that the public sector bank is probably not going to recover.
I just wanted to come to the point that Lata was making before this, about Usha Ispat and the names were doing the round. So we have the list, we have the date on which the defaults were triggered, which was 2003 in Usha Ispat's case, up till 2013. So for almost 10 years, so it is possible that there were loans given after the initial defaults. This isn't just the interest.
And the curious case about Usha Ispat is that they are an active company. They have zero revenues, and they're still filing their returns with the MCA as of the last fiscal year. So that was quite curious for us to what the actual status of this company is, and so what the actual status of this loan amount is.
Okay, did you find out if further loans were given to Usha Ispat? Because usually when a company is declared a bad loan, banks don't normally give further loans to those companies. So is this compounding of the 2003 loan?
No, it doesn't appear so.
Fresh loans were given?
Because the last loan trigger date is 2013. So
the last default trigger date is 2013. So we have to assume that fresh loans were given post 2003 as well.
Also, not all of Usha Ispat's defaults are willful defaults. In fact, only 5,000 crore are termed as willful. So that's also one thing. I mean, and in 2002, in fact, there was a case where there was some CBI raids on the promoter's house. So after all of that, they're still being termed as defaulters.
Now, Usha Ispat is actually owned by the Usha India Group, which is also a pretty significant defaulter. They're not in the top 10 list, but they're number 11 on our list.
11, yeah.
And they also were the owners of Malvika Steel, which is number 10 on the list.
Which was bought over by sale.
Yeah. So the Usha.
Yeah, that's right. Malvika Steel is on the list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Garima,
So
Manisha,
together
I'll come
it's
back
about
to you in just a second, but
21,000.
let me also bring in AshwinFerrier. He joins us in our studio and also on the phone line, Supreme Court lawyer HP Ranina. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us. Mr. Parikh, you've heard what the team at News Laundry has just been articulating for us. This is, of course, the investigation that News Laundry has been conducting over the past 2 months. Your first reaction, sir?
Well, I'm very surprised. I must say I'm a little aghast as well, because one thing is if the banking system and the regulators working with this kind of data, I mean, from 2003 onwards, and the names that are being discussed just now, do give me a bit of surprise. I was expecting, many more different names. That was one. Second is, more importantly, a name like LIC figuring on the list. So once again, and that too, the amount showed, is almost of the order of about 65,000 crores. So these are not small amounts to begin with. And they suddenly come up. I mean, so there was absolutely opaqueness about some of these facts which are now coming out. Suddenly we find that these numbers are now coming up in the system. What is the banking system working on in that case and recovery? And where are the assets? I mean, if something is lying there for 2003 onwards and we kept on giving loans, and suddenly once again we find that there's a default in 2013, quite clearly there is a lot of story behind this which is ununderstood, or one which is not really, I mean, we can't discuss without the facts. But this in itself is a revealing, it's a very surprising list, I mean, I must say.
It is. I think LIC has emerged as the big surprise there, and as we've been pointing out, and I do want to highlight this once again, that the team at News Laundry has tried to reach out to all of the companies that have been mentioned in their report, but none of the companies, with the exception of Kingfisher, have chosen to respond. But Lata and Mr. Ranina, let me also bring in Mr. Ranina. Mr. Ranina, you've been listening into this conversation, so I'll get you back in just a second. But Lata, on the point that Mr. Parikh was making about LIC.
No, LIC has been giving corporate loans, so it doesn't surprise me at all. LIC also subscribes to bonds in very many different ways. Corporates get loans from LIC. That is not a matter of surprise at all. For me, what is surprising is that this is a very old list. I'm very sure that there are very many more indebted borrowers who have owed the banking system a lot of money. Lloyd Steel, for instance, 9,500 crores. They were about a 1,000 crore loaned NPA way back in 2003. So I'm not very sure whether new loans were given or it is a compounding. Even if new loans were given, it must have been very small, because if you simply compound a 1,000 crore rupee loan, it will add up to, some 4,000-5,000 crores by 2016 anyways. So some of it perhaps is new loan, and then the list says that of that 6,000 crore is willful default. So it's a little surprising how this list is put together, because Lloyd Steel was anyway even acquired by Uttam Galva. So at that point in time, were they acquiring a bad loan? When the loan is acquired, does it become like part of it? Does it become a fresh loan?
Sure. And, so let's just bring in a quick final comment on those questions that you raised with the News Laundry team. Manisha and Garima, I'll give you a quick couple of last minutes before we wrap up this discussion. Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, Lata's point, even we found out, we were looking at Lloyd Steel, and then we found out they were bought over by Uttam, and it wasn't there in the list. We reached out to Uttam asking them that, tell us about this. They didn't respond. But yeah, it is strange for us. If you look at Kingfisher, it is about 3,000 crore about, and all of these are just defaults, not willful. So we couldn't understand how the banks were coming to a decision on what's a willful default, what is a non-willful default.
Difficult to explain in most cases, Garima.
Yeah.
Kingfisher is a case of a business that failed very clearly. They were not profitable. Whereas a willful defaulter is usually someone who has siphoned money. Now Kingfisher could be declared, I mean, it has been declared lately willful defaulter by many banks, but even that, the State Bank of India chairman very clearly explained, is not because they siphoned money. They had no evidence when they were calling it willful defaulter, that they use the money intended for Kingfisher in any other, for any other company or any other purpose. They called it willful because he had otherwise money and he was not paying up. That was why. So there are two reasons why banks judge a borrower as defaulter. One, if he siphoned off the money, used it for purpose other than intended, then they file a willful default case, or they file a willful default case when they know he has money and he's still not returning it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give a final comment to you, Mr. Parikh, before we wrap up this discussion. A final comment from you, Mr. AshwinFerrier.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one is, of course, we now know that the banking system, the first question that I have now for the system, for the industry is, what kind of data are we working on? If we keep on, if we do not write off, if something is lying there in the books for so many years, if we've provided for it, the best thing to do is to write it off. So that was one observation. The second, I said LIC mainly because it does not enjoy the same kind of rights that the banking system does in regards either SARFAESI or recovery. So, an accumulated number of 65,000 gave me a bit of a surprise, just to clarify. But on the whole, both the regulator and the banking system must first look at the data and the quality of the data that is being given to each other and to the industry as well. I think the list is very surprising, I must admit.
All right, Mr. Parikh, we appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Garima and Manisha, thank you very much for sharing your story with us here on CNBC TV 18. As we told you, that this is information that has been accessed and assessed by newslaundry.com. And of course, they will be bringing you the next installment of their story on newslaundry.com tomorrow, so watch out for that. They did try and reach out to all of those companies that have been named, but they did not elicit a response. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. On